So wayside soil, you might put some synonyms alongside. People that are in a state where they might be wayside soil, that certainly would parallel well with someone that's stiff-necked, hard of heart. See, the heart is the whole issue in this parable. All these grounds are the heart. So if someone has a hard heart, they've got a stiff neck. These are all a little bit different symbolic things, but the hard heart is stiff-necked, an uncircumcised heart. Phrases like that refer to somebody who is resistant, hardened in their ways. They don't want to change. That's really what it comes down to. They don't want to change because in order to receive the seed, you have to be willing to change. Something has to change. Who's one of the first examples in the Bible of somebody with a hard heart or a hardened neck or a stiff neck? Cain. Definitely you could put Cain in that category. That wasn't the one I was thinking of, but Cain would fit. Let me use another word. This will narrow it down. Who do we know of early in the biblical record, in the first few books of the Bible, who had their heart hardened? Pharaoh. He's a really good example of somebody that might be wayside soil that's not going to be broken up. It's too hard. I know some that say, well, God said that he was going to harden Pharaoh's heart, and some people use this to teach forms of Calvinism that Pharaoh might have wanted to be saved. You need to understand what it means to want to be saved, all right? This is a little deeper, but I want you to think about this because this is extremely important to understand. Wanting to be saved from God's perspective is not wanting to avoid judgment. That's wanting to be saved from our perspective. From our perspective, we think, I want to be saved from judgment. You know what God is offering you when he's offering you salvation? It's relationship. He wants to give you a relationship. So it isn't just, I'm going to deliver you from something, some painful experience or some terrible judgment. That's why we can't just make the gospel about fear. It needs to be about love, because what he's really offering, yes, it's an escape from judgment, but that's not the real thing that you should value most, because you may have to go through terrible difficulty. Here's what you're going to see in the stony and thorny. They can't take this, so they leave. You may have to go through terrible difficulty to have that relationship, to hold on to that relationship. And so God isn't promising you in the short term an escape from difficulty. Some people enter a relationship with God as if that means I'm going to escape problems and difficulty, even if they just think it's the eternal destruction of some kind that I'm going to escape. That's not the reason to be in a relationship with God. It's a good reason. Who in the right mind would want to face eternal destruction? Or what nominal Christendom thinks of as everlasting torment. Who would want to face anything like that? Of course you don't. But that isn't what God's offering you, is a get-out-of-jail-free card, where you can now go live your life however you want. I'll let you off the hook, and you can live your life however you want. What God's offering you is an opportunity to live your life in a better place of relationship with him. The only way to do it is to get out of jail, because you can't live it inside the prison cell. You have to actually come out of the prison cell to live in a relationship with the Lord. Don't turn the grace of God into lasciviousness. Romans 6, Brother Moore's quoting from. It's that and other places that talk about that. We cannot turn the grace of God into lasciviousness in the sense that you're released from the prison and you think, now I'm free to do what I want. You're not free to do what you want. You're free to be in a relationship with God, because before you couldn't be in a relationship with God. You weren't able to in that prison you were in. The prison of your mind kept you from being able to be in a relationship with God. But once God breaks that prison open, what he's offering you is a relationship. It's not just an escape from the prison. It's what you get when you leave the prison that means the most. I know this is going to sound almost shocking, maybe not to anyone in here, but maybe to some others, but it's not getting out of the prison that's the greatest gift. That's just the first step. It's what's out there that's the greatest gift. It's not just freedom from the prison. It's what's out there that he wants you to reach. And so it isn't enough just to be freed from something. Got off track talking about Calvinism. I want to come back to this issue of Pharaoh, because he's an example of somebody who you could call wayside soil if you'd like. You might put him in that category. God did tell Moses that I am going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And so sometimes people get carried away with that and say that every time Pharaoh hardened his heart, every time he really wanted to accept God, but God wouldn't let him. And that's not quite what happened in the story for two reasons. First, let's consider Pharaoh's motives. If the first time that the very first plague occurred, when the water turned to blood, if Pharaoh had been so unnerved by that, and he might have been, it would have been much easier to shock him and to maybe scare him if the magicians, Yanes and Yambres, had not matched it. But they didn't match it, they just mimicked it. Matching and mimicking are not the same thing. If they matched it, they would have turned all the waters in Egypt to blood. They turned a little bowl probably into blood. It was a little amount. And there's no telling if it was really blood or they did some sleight of hand and put some powder in there. There's no telling what they did. You're talking about a man that touched his staff down and every water in Egypt turned to blood. You can't do that with any chemical. Not that quick. I don't know how you could do it even over time. So that was a very different category, but I'm sure the fact that they acted like they could do it too caused Pharaoh to be, well, this guy isn't such a big deal. My guys can do that. But even if Pharaoh had decided he wanted to soften his heart at that time, why would he be softening his heart? This is what I meant a moment ago when I said motives are so absolutely critical and why the reason why we're serving the Lord is so important. If Pharaoh had broken under one of those plagues, and thus God had to keep his heart hard because he might break, you think if he broke, he'd be breaking because what an incredible and great God this is? I sure would like to serve him. You think that's what Pharaoh's breaking would have meant? No. It's that I don't want to have my economy destroyed. Little did he know he was going to lose his son, but I don't want to have my economy destroyed, my nation destroyed, my power and influence undermined. And so I'll gladly, he wouldn't, his pride, that's part of the issue. But if he was capable of breaking, I'll just fall down and go along with the program. That's not worshiping God. I usually use this example in the 19th chapter of 1 Kings where Elijah is complaining, astonishingly enough, after he had just done one of the greatest miracles, standing up against 850 false prophets who all were killed because of the miracles he brought down, an incredible act that he did on Mount Carmel. And here he's standing there just a little bit later. It wasn't years later, just a little bit later. He's crying about, I'm the only one, and what am I going to do? And Jezebel is going to get me. This is the man that prayed about 30 words in Hebrew is all he prayed. And fire fell from heaven. And now he's afraid of this Phoenician princess. She might get me. What in the world? It just shows you how roller coaster our emotions can be at times, right? Well, God backed me up then. He might not back me up now. That is a lack of faith is what that is. But when God finally spoke to him about it, he said, you know, I've got 7,000 men in Israel. He says, you're talking about I'm all alone and what am I going to do? One man and God, brothers, what in the world? You never were alone. But I'm all alone and what am I going to do? And Jezebel's going to get me. And he said, I've got 7,000 men in Israel. I like the way it words in the King James. It makes it real poetic, but you could say it simpler than this, but I like the poetic way it says it. All the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. And I've often said there's a difference between those two things, bowing the knee or kissing the mouth. You can bow the knee without loving or caring about whatever it is you're bowing the knee to. You might be forced to bow the knee. You may hate the person you're bowing the knee to. But usually you kiss the mouth of somebody, it's a sign of love, affection, whatever, intimacy. And so I feel like there's two different categories going on here. There's some people who would bow the knee even though they don't agree with the program at all. They just don't want to be persecuted. They don't want to go through some hardship. So they go down on their knee. They might hate that person they're bowing the knee to, whether it's a god or a king or whatever. I'm sure many times in the history of Israel, they did. They bowed the knee to conquering kings and they didn't love them. They didn't like them. You can bow the knee, and by the way, you can't do either one as a Christian. But you can bow the knee to something you shouldn't bow the knee to without really wanting to be in a relationship with it. But when you kiss the mouth, that's a sign of relationship. So some people bow the knee, but they don't like what they're bowing the knee to. They feel like I've got to go do this. Some people are kissing the mouth because they like it. What God was saying is, I've got folks that not only are not in a relationship with Baal, they won't even go along with the program. That's a dangerous place to be because if you just bow the knee, nobody knows what's in your heart. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah all could have gone down on their knees and nobody would have ever persecuted them and thrown them in that furnace of fire. And they could have been praying to God down there on their knees. But they couldn't do it. They were men that not only wouldn't kiss the mouth, they wouldn't bow the knee either. So they not only would not accept a relationship with a false god, but they're not going to even act like they're accepting it, go along with the program. But I'm talking about Pharaoh now. I think Pharaoh would have gladly bowed the knee to God a few times. And that's when God had to start hardening his heart. Because you'll notice it's about the first half of the 10 plagues. In the 7th chapter, it says God hardened his heart. Then after that, every time it says Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart. Then you get halfway through the plagues, and then it starts saying the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Now, if the Lord had been doing it all along, why would you differentiate? What I think was happening was Pharaoh was hardening his heart. Now, you might say the Lord hardened it in the sense that the Lord set up the circumstances where he knew Pharaoh's pride wouldn't bend. You realize the first few plagues, the magicians were mimicking those plagues? You could keep hardening your heart thinking, we got this covered. Our guys are matching them toe for toe. To, of course, you get up to of all things, lice created out of dust, life created out of non-life, something's not alive, and life is created. Couldn't do that. Can't create life. All that this wicked world and whatever powers that are in it can create is death. It cannot give you life. When God created life out of some non-living, inanimate thing, they had to say then, this is the finger of God. We can't match it. And after that point, and about halfway through, you'll start seeing God hardening Pharaoh's heart. And the reason I think that is because at that point, Pharaoh realized we can't match this anymore. I might have to bend the knee, put on like I'm going along with the program. God wasn't going to let him do it. Number one, he wasn't going to let him do it for reasons I've said throughout the years, that God was going to hit Egypt with 10 plagues. It wasn't like Nineveh later, when Jonah went to Nineveh and judgment was hanging over them like an axe over their neck. And it was up to them. They repented, which to me is astonishing. The Assyrians, that was their capital at that time, the Assyrians were desperately wicked, violent people, some of the most cruel and evil people in the history of mankind. You read some of the ways they treated cities when they conquered them, we wouldn't even talk about it in mixed company. It was horrific things they did to people. And yet one prophet who didn't even want to go there, who didn't like them, think how crazy that is. If you had somebody show up that loves you and he's like, I don't want to see you go through this. What do you think Jonah's face looked like while he was telling them to straighten up? He was mad after they repented. You think he was the best example of someone coming to win them to the Lord? That just shows you how incredibly powerful the Word of God can be, sometimes in spite of the vessel. And God, unfortunately, has had to do that throughout history. Sometimes he's done mighty things and said mighty things through very unqualified vessels. That's a gentle, politically correct way of putting it. But as time goes on, he's going to do less and less of that because he's looking for a glorious church without spot, wrinkle, blemish, or any such thing. And in order to get that, he can't keep using unclean vessels. There's sometimes when that's just the best he's got in that day, and that's pretty sad, where he's got to use an unclean vessel because it's the only person who will do what he's asking them to do, even though they're an absolute mess. But he's not going to keep tolerating that. In fact, I think he's crossed the line a little while back. And I mean in the church world, but I mean in this body. I think he's crossed that line. And now judgment, you better be careful. Better be careful how you talk about other people. Better be careful what you're doing behind people's backs. You better be careful to keep your ethics and your morals, as I said, at a high level if you're in leadership. Because judgment not only begins at the house of God, if it begins at the house of God, it'll begin at the top of the house of God before it comes down to the lower levels of the house of God. So we have a heavy burden on us, don't we? So number one, I think Pharaoh was going, Egypt I should say, maybe might be more accurate. Egypt was going to go through all 10 plagues. 10 is a judgment number, isn't it? God already had planned there's going to be 10 plagues, so he wasn't going to let Pharaoh back up if he wanted to. Number two, and this is the key thing that I'm hoping you're getting, God isn't looking for a false remorse. If Pharaoh had broken and said, I can't take any more of this, just forgive me and get out of here, he wouldn't have meant any of it. If Pharaoh had broken, it wouldn't be so, this God is so incredible, I want to be in a relationship with him. That's the point. So God hardened Pharaoh's heart because Pharaoh was never going. This is where these things overlap, where some of the mystery, even in Romans 1, is clear. Pharaoh was never going to turn. His pride, his arrogance, his own determination to have his own will in his own way, he was never going to turn. He might go along with the program and bow the knee to end the plagues, but he was never going to be in a relationship with the Lord in any true sense in his heart. It'd always just be a put-on thing. And God isn't going to accept that either.
The second chapter of James, when he was talking about, thou believest there is one God, thou doest well. And he says, and the devils also believe and tremble.
The fact that the devils believe and the fact that they're in awe of God does not mean they're in a right relationship with him.
But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works, without really a commitment, is dead.
There's a statement Brother Moore's bringing up that we could talk about all night. There's rich depths in that. Notice the parallels in that passage Brother Moore just quoted. It is not enough just to believe. You say, but I believe and respect him. The devils respect him, not in the way we think of respect, but they respect him. I can prove it. You should be able to prove it. It isn't hard to prove. You can start in the book of Job. Any disobedience going on there? I personally believe that was a powerful supernatural entity that is Satan there, all right? Yes, he is trying to cause Job a lot of trouble, but is there even 1 inch of him going outside the boundaries God set for him? No. Now, though the disciples had problems with evil spirits, which shouldn't surprise us because they certainly weren't on the level of Jesus, did Jesus have any trouble with them? Oh, some of them argued with him, if you want to call it arguing. It really wasn't arguing, Andy. It was more like pleading. Yeah, please don't cast us out into outer darkness for our time. But it was a plea. They weren't saying, we're not doing it. We're not leaving. There wasn't any question they were leaving.
Yeah, we're going. The gods that were destroyed, there was 400 years of Israel basically becoming numb to the actual worship they were supposed to do. See that by what they did after they got in the wilderness and made that camp. God was showing Israel, these are not the true gods, and I'm taking them down.
By the time they started building a golden calf, which is just like one of the Egyptian gods, you see how blind people can be? That's a wayside soil type person too. You're absolutely right. God was making a point. Not only was he making a point that he is the only supreme God, that anything that calls itself a God, he can flatten out. But I absolutely agree with you. He was making sure his Israelites knew, no point in worshiping any of these guys. So there's a spiritual principle, I think, in this story. It's in Isaiah as well. If you keep resisting God over and over again, eventually you can get to a place where he has appealed to you in every different way he could appeal to you. And if he's appealed to you in every way he could appeal to you, and none of them you're going to respond to, either you'll never respond no matter what he does, there's the unforgivable sin, so it's done, or he may do something that I think is what's going on in Romans 1, which is very close to what you're describing in Isaiah 6, 9 to 10, where he finally comes to a place, and there's a multiplicity of reasons why he might do this. That's what I'm trying to, every time we talk about it, make sure we're looking at several reasons for it and several time periods for it, for blinding somebody or shutting their ears or whatever. But Romans 1, maybe we should read that passage. Romans 1, 18 to 32. I'm going to go through this quick. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. By the way, that statement, and this might be shocking to some people too, that statement is about all of mankind. That's not talking about the Jews, that I revealed myself to the Jews, so they should know better. That's talking about all mankind. And if you look at the Greek here, what seems to be, it's kind of harder to pick this out in the King James, but what seems to be the object is the creation. Something in the creation is the evidence of that. You should be able to look at the creation and realize there is a God. It's one of the greatest arguments that's used against atheists, which they never have an answer for this. They come up with these ridiculous rejoinders to it, but they are always appealing, like if you're talking about is what Hitler did in World War II, in the mass murders that he carried out, and some of the other brutal things he did in those countries, especially Poland, is what Hitler did in World War II morally evil or not? And of course, an atheist, whether you realize this or not, I don't know if you've thought about this, they have zero ground to stand on because there is no basis for morality without a God that's a moral God. So they would say, well, it's not best for humanity. Not best for what part of humanity? The Germans thought it was the best thing in the world for them. I wouldn't advise you taking any classes like this because it's pretty rough. But I took multiple classes at several levels from Tel Aviv University on the Holocaust. It's a pretty rough thing to study. You think they must have been desperately evil. They were, but they didn't think they were. They actually thought this is best for society. And when you clear out tens of thousands of people out of an area, just think how many homes open up. Think how much property suddenly becomes available to your people. In their mind, it was no different than anybody conquering enemies that they think of as lesser than them, except there was massive racism built into it. Same ideology, Brother Moore said, that's associated with what's going on in Iran right now and what's going through our culture here in the United States, because there is a great division being created in the right wing of the political element between people that support Israel and people that not just don't support Israel, people that have almost what seems like a hatred for Israel. And I can understand why you'd hate a government that you feel like is doing things that you think are terrible and barbaric, but it has gone past criticizing a government. We all have had governments we might criticize. It's gone to the point where there are highly inappropriate things being said and spirits created that would get us into a different subject, because I might go way down a rabbit trail. This passage in Romans is talking about the fact that all mankind should recognize there's a God. And I started saying one of the reasons is the moral law had to come from a moral lawgiver. Anytime you discuss, I hope you don't have to, but you're bound to. Anytime you discuss these kind of issues with someone that's an atheist, get them down to that point. Get them down to the subject of what is the basis of morality. And I don't mean how you dress or modesty. I'm talking about what is the basis for morality in terms of, say, murder. What makes murder wrong? What makes some of these terrible atrocities that were done in Germany and Poland and Czechoslovakia, not Czechoslovakia anymore, but in some of these places where Hitler went and did these barbarities, what makes them morally evil? Because we all accept they're evil. What is the reason why they're evil? See, Romans is talking about how you can just look at the creation and you're going to see there's a God. He's a God of great design. There's a movement right now going on. Not all of it is Christian. Some of it is what call deist almost, and that they think there might be a God of some kind. They don't necessarily think it's a Christian God. But the idea of information that is so much a part of everything, including our DNA, proves somebody programmed this thing. Somebody put it together. The more information you find in the creation, that's organized information, and the idea of intelligent design, there's an intelligent design movement in science. It isn't all Christian, but the idea behind intelligent design is somebody intelligent had to design this. I mentioned those four morons of they call them the four horsemen of the apocalypse, like they've done some great damage. Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett are the four who did the most damage of the new atheists. They like to argue for morality, but they don't understand there's no arguing for morality without somebody that set that standard. Because otherwise, every man just gets to do what's right in his own eyes. Because if I feel like it's moral, one person who's a little bit confrontational, who's a creation scientist, somebody was telling them, everybody just does what's right for them. Everybody's their own God. He says, so you're saying I'm my own God, I can just do whatever I want. Yes, that's right. He goes, so if I decide to beat you to a pulp, that's good? No. Why isn't it? See, there's some standard underneath all of it. And once you find the standard that we all know it's right and wrong. See, I was talking about creation, but there's something deeper than creation. There's a law that goes back beyond even the creation. There is a moral line in this universe that all of us recognize. We may not all put it in the same place. People bend it in places. But there's a moral line that runs through everything. None of us think abuse is a good thing. None of us think murder is okay. People justify it because they say it's not murder. I'm defending or I'm doing this. Need to do this to protect my people or whatever. But none of us think those things are good. So why don't we think they're good? Because something's in us. There's a vestige of the conscience that God put in Adam and Eve still there. That's why we even have to be careful when we talk about being dead in trespasses and sins. And I hear people say, well, if you're dead, then you couldn't respond to God. If you're dead, then you don't have any conscience. That's not what being dead in trespasses and sins means. It means from God's perspective, you're under a sentence of death. Because you're in your trespasses and sins, you've got a sentence of death. You can see people out here right now that aren't even Christians that do morally good things. Their conscience makes them do it. They're not dead in the sense that you just are so mindlessly automaton that all you can do is evil. There's people that do good. The scripture even says there's the Gentiles don't even have the law that are doing good things. And they're making a shame out of you who have it and aren't doing good things. Now, I'm going to get into all kinds of other subjects tonight. That's how we're not getting very far into this parable, but they're important subjects. Yes, Brother Joseph, go ahead.
A few years ago, my pastor and the body back home in Haiti, he taught about, the difference between the level of morality versus having that spiritual, that biblical understanding that is taking us to higher ground, because we need to pass that level of morality. Not that we don't need it, we need it, but it's not having that is not what is leading us to be like a member of the bride, or even to be qualified for heaven. So we need more than that level of morality, but it's still very good. But as you're saying, a lot of the people in the world, they don't even know the Lord. They don't even have a relationship with Him, but they have that level of morality, that life, that moral life. They still have that.
It's very similar, Brother Joseph, to what we call common grace. Anybody know what common grace is? I mean, remember what Jesus said? He said, the sun shines and the rain falls on the good and the evil, doesn't it? When we need the sun, you might not be worthy of it at all, but you're getting the sun some days when you don't deserve it. Same thing goes for the rain. There's farmers who may be the most wicked individuals you ever met. Their crops are getting watered too when the rain falls. Now, there's times God brings judgment, there's drought or something, but generally speaking, there's common grace. That means there's a certain measure of God's blessing that's across this whole earth. Not all the time, but there's certain things we all benefit from, even if you're not in a relationship with Him. Same thing comes with morality. There's common morality that is a good kind of morality, but it's not the level of morality that'll raise you up to being an image bearer of Christ. You're not going to be more like God because you do certain moral things, because God is far deeper in His morality than that level.